Hello, we're still celebrating the 10-year anniversary of this channel, and I've been looking back at some of the early videos that I did before I knew what I was doing. And in one of those videos I looked at some of the different ways that British people say the word scone, and it got me thinking, British people aren't the only ones who have different pronunciations for different things. The United States of America is rife with words that are said a different way depending on where you live or who you are. I'm Lawrence Brown, and if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, do that now. In the meantime, let's talk words. Sometimes Americans use words like ornery, which supports the view that the Wild West never really ended. And I say Americans use the word ornery, but it's actually just used by America's aunts and uncles, and sometimes about them. What does it mean, Lawrence? Well, to quote me from 7 years ago, ornery is
a dialectic contraction of the word ordinary that means either disagreeably stubborn or endearingly mischievous.
And it was in that video that I discussed the many ways that Americans say it. It basically comes down to three distinct pronunciations: ornery, ornery, or ornery. And this is a perfect example of two things that you'll see again in this list. Number one, Americans like to play fast and loose with syllables. Number two, Americans also like to play fast and loose with the letter R. Thanks, Lawrence. Toilets. You might think that the only difference between British and American loos is the words we use to describe them. But in addition to the fact that American toilets look like an ode to sea level rise, there's also a difference in how many Americans say it. And when I say many, I mean a dwindling few. Here in Illinois, Indiana, and probably Kentucky, I've occasionally heard people of a certain generation pronounce it toilet. This tendency toward pronouncing an R that doesn't exist is also found in words like wash, Washington, and of course, sherbet. When I first noticed this, I thought, ooh, what if I use all four in one sentence? In Washington, I washed my hands with sherbet soap after using the toilet. Sincerely, Colonel Brown. Colonel being a more widespread example in American English. And speaking of leadership roles, Americans are the absolute masters of eliminating syllables. Some of the same Americans that leave an extra consonant in the toilet occasionally reduce the word iron to just one syllable. The first time I heard this was from a member of my wife's family, which has strong connections to the South. For some reason, she was giving me unsolicited advice about sock maintenance, and I won't bore you with the details because I don't remember them. But what I do remember is that she became the first and only person in my life to rhyme the words darn and iron. And that's how you iron socks, Lawrence. Lawrence? And the second time I heard it was on the 4th of July, 2022. And I know what you're thinking, ooh, Lawrence, that's an oddly specific date. How do you remember that? Because that is the day that I spent America's Independence Day in Pittsburgh. No sooner had I taken this photograph that a slightly drunk man looked at me, pointed to the sign on the hill, and read the words back to me as if English were my fourth language. Iron City Beer. It was at that moment that I realized that English might have been his fourth language. Anyway, something else that contains iron are pecans. And I was going to include the word pecan on this list, but then back down when I realised I've talked about pecans and pecan pies way too much on this channel. But pecan pies are not the only thing that Americans will consume cold. Americans will actually drink cold coffee on purpose. And at first this felt like madness, the sort of thing that you only do when your coffee's been sitting out for a while and you're too far away from the microwave. But in the height of Midwestern summer, I decided to give cold brew coffee a try, and to my surprise, I actually loved it. The problem? Cafe cold brew adds up fast, and the stuff that you get from the store tastes like it's been sitting out since the Queen's Jubilee. And that's why I started using Trade Coffee. They work with 15 of the best roasters in the US to create a cold brew collection. Beans roasted specifically for cold brew. When my order arrives, it's already ground perfectly for brewing at home. All I do is scoop the coffee into a pitcher, add water, pop it in the fridge overnight, and wake up to cold brew so smooth it could charm a customs officer. It's better than the cafe, it costs less, and it fits into my unpredictable schedule. Trade lets me skip or reschedule deliveries if I'm away, so I never come home to a stale coffee situation. For a limited time, Trade is giving 50% off a month of cold brew. That's around 60 cups of cold brew for 50% off. That's drinktrade.com/LITP to get 50% off 1 month of cold brew. drinktrade.com/LITP. The link is in my description below. Despite all of our differences, there's one thing that Brits and Americans can agree on, and that's that none of us can agree on how to pronounce the word bean. And I'm not talking about the kind that you put on your toast or yogurt if you're feeling desperate. I'm talking about the past participle of the word be. In both countries, this is pronounced in one of three ways. Been, which is far less common in the US than in Britain. Been, as in, where have you been? Or, where have you been? And then, particularly in the upper Midwest and parts of Scotland apparently, there's a third option. In what many are calling the Obi-Wan Kenobi of words, been becomes ben. Where have you been? Where have you been? Evidently, this phenomenon only occurs in cold northern climates and scientists don't know why. Weirder still, whenever I point it out to people who pronounce it that way, they'll say something like, I can't actually hear the difference between ben and ben, and when you put it that way, nor can I. And then there are words that I thought we all agreed on, like the word caramel. I could be misremembering this, but I think British people almost universally pronounce it as it's spelled. Caramel. In the US, I've mostly heard two variants. Caramel, which is more often heard in the south and northeast, and quite bizarrely, caramel, which is favoured in states where syllables are outlawed. To be clear, that's all of the states on this map where red is the dominant colour. And back when I lived in Indiana, where people do say caramel, things got even more confusing, not just because I was in Indiana. See, there's a suburb of Indianapolis spelled C-A-R-M-E-L and is sadly pronounced the way that it's spelled instead of caramel, which makes me think we should start a petition. I've talked in the past about how British and American houses are very different, but so is the way we pronounce one particular feature, the roof. I must not insult their intelligence by explaining what a roof is. A roof is a structure representing the upper covering of a house, but you Americans can't seem to agree how to say it. Some of you say roof like me, and some of you say rough like my dogs, and some, like my wife, use them interchangeably. Wife, are you busy?
Yes.
Let's have a quick question. It's part of an experiment. How do you pronounce the word roof, as in the thing on the top of our house?
Roof.
That's the only way you say it?
No, I say roof as well.
Right. If you were impersonating a dog, how would you do that?
Neither of those ways. I'd say rough. Like rough, rough.
They're all different?
Yes.
Jesus. But Americans aren't alone. British people also can't decide what to do with the letters ooh. Take the word book, for example. Depending on where you are in Britain, people might say, I read books, or I read books, or I read books, or I don't read. It's important to be inclusive. So let me know in the comments how you say roof, or any of these words for that matter, including this. Crayon. And because 90% of my long-form viewers don't watch my YouTube shorts, here is a relevant example of what you're missing out on. Back when I still lived in Britain, I'm pretty sure I only ever heard crayon or crayon. But when it comes to sounding out these two very basic syllables, Britain ain't got nothing on America. Because here in the United States, I've heard 4 very distinct ways of saying it, and not all of them involve 2 syllables. First, you've got crayon, a pronunciation favoured primarily by Americans east of the Mississippi. Then you've got crayon, which is popular out west in the northeast and some parts of Appalachia. And then you've got crayon, a monosyllabic offering occasionally found here in the Midwest. And finally, the diphthong pronunciation that is crown, as in the headgear worn by countless monarchs as well as Eva Lynn from He-Man. This next suggestion was posted beneath a recent secret live stream by DJ K, who rightly offered us syrup. Actual syrup, or right, just the word. This, of course, is referencing the great syrup divide, which I used to think was the Canadian border. I looked into it though, and some websites seem to think that syrup is a New England thing, which would make sense because syrup is a New England thing. But after reading people's testimonies on Reddit, it looks like the syrup pronunciation either exists in other parts of the US or Reddit isn't a reliable source. So to be on the safe side, I figured that nobody would question the validity of a random YouTube poll. So I asked Americans, how do you pronounce syrup? After 53,000 of you responded, this poor-reviewed study found that around a third of Americans say syrup. Curiously, when I repeated the poll to just 20 of my patrons on our latest secret live stream, the results were almost identical, which means my patrons are a bellwether for the whole country. Become one yourself at patreon.com/lostinthepond or by clicking the join button below. Either way, if you pronounce it syrup, let me know in the comments below whereabouts in America you are, but you know, don't include your physical address again. And then there's one that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the word theatre. In fact, as somebody who used to work in the theatre, I know this to be a word that British people can't decide how to pronounce. It's either theatre or theatre or theatre. But in America, you could argue that this word is special, because not only is this word sometimes spelled differently to how it is in Britain, it's also said in one of two ways. Most thespians that I interacted with would say theatre. But ever so now and again, usually when you get somebody with a southern twang, it comes out as theatre, which I was about to poke fun at, but then I realised that this used to be more of a predominant pronunciation of the word among Americans from up north.
President Lincoln was present at a performance at Ford's Theatre.
Which got me wondering if English people used to say it like that in Shakespeare's time. Sadly, nobody can seem to find the audio recordings from that period, so I'm just going to say it's true. And those are 9 words that Americans can't decide how to pronounce. Let me know in the comments how you say them. And in the meantime, here are 11 American English words that baffle British people. You'll watch that video next. And until the next video, goodbye.